Well, what do we have here? The reason I ended up playing Impossible Creatures is revealed actually quite early on in the game, as it pops up here saying it was made by Nordic Games, which I don't know what that is. I think that's part of THQ or something. It also says it's made by Relic Entertainment, and I was actually originally looking at playing Dawn of War, the original, by Relic, who also made Homeworld, which I played recently, but there was a game they made in between Homeworld and Dawn of War called Impossible Creatures, which I happened to stumble across for some reason looking up on Wikipedia, and I was like, what's this? Then I realised I owned it, and I was like, well, let's just play it, and it turned out to be fairly interesting. So what we're going to do is have a full playthrough of Impossible Creatures right here, and I'm going to tell you what it is. First, the all-important plot. We're the son of a mad scientist who sent us a letter summoning us to some mysterious islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, owned by a mysterious rich guy. What's going on over here? Well, some mad science, as it turns out. You might even say some impossible creatures, and we learn this quite quickly. We go to the lab we were supposed to check, and there's this sort of mantis tiger thing, all very good, and there's some other thing as well hunting us down. So basically, this game is going to be themed around making new animals. And this actually ties into it being a top-down traditional RTS surprisingly well, although probably the general concepts of the game need to be revamped. Well, we'll get into my ranty ideas later, I suppose. For now, we're being accosted by that rich guy Upton Julius who owns everything here, who I think has taken over the mad science project to dominate the world, that sort of thing. But we are rescued from his scorpion dogs by this helicopter train that flies in. A very understated feature of the game is that there are helicopter trains. And it's one of these things where it's like, you could have made a game just about that. You could have called it Impossible Machines and made it about coming up with your own inventions. It essentially is that, but for animals instead. We combine animals to invent new ones to use in battle. Well, we fly away on our helicopter train. No explanation given for why there's a train part involved in this at all. And the game begins. So we need to collect some DNA of various animals to create our own animal soldiers to fight the mad scientist Upton Julius and somehow resolve the mystery of why they killed our father or something. I don't think we know that our father's dead at this stage, so we're just looking for them. But it did tell you that he was dead in the opening cutscene, as I recall. And the lady who just saved us, Lucy, I think in my headcanon, is like someone who was in love with your father and is now automatically in love with you as a result, or something like that. So something's going on here. We're all writing the fan fiction. Well, I am anyway. Here's the actual game. We capture a few animals, and we go into this creature combiner, where we have to, rather than in a usual strategy game just make units, we have to make the units. We have to invent units from pieces the game gives us. So, for example, we're making some kind of skunk lion, and you can see to the left and right, what body parts you take from each candidate animal determines what abilities this combined animal will have. So by giving it the skunk's tail, it can have the defensive cloud ability, the lion's legs allow it to leap, and giving it the skunk's head instead of the lion's head gives it extra melee damage because the skunk apparently has a fiercer bite than a lion. I don't know. Maybe the zoology isn't very accurate, but it doesn't matter very much. So soon, we're taking over this island using an army of skunk lions and some kind of porcupine thing. I think it's pretty much just a porcupine, because you do have the option of not actually combining the animals at all. Well, we're using the porcupines because they are a ranged unit, and this, being an old school RTS, struck me as the obvious superior strategy to focus on ranged attacks, because ranged attacks are always going to have more DPS and better AI just because melee stuff doesn't work. The units are mostly not applying damage, they're mostly just janking about on each other and blocking each other's movement. Ranged attacks go through everything, and they're always shooting, so even if their damage looks lower, they do more damage overall. But ranged units tend to be weak in melee, so you can't really focus entirely on one thing. Here was me trying out some of these special abilities. Our skunks can shoot out gas, and the porcupines can shoot their spines in all directions, which actually damages your own units, so it's not very useful. Generally speaking, while you can make animals that have various unique abilities which you have to manually trigger, I didn't do this because I didn't want to manually trigger them. I find it easier to literally just select my group and attack move into the enemy and then focus on doing something else with the micro rather than selecting units and targeting individual things. And Because of that, we're not really going to use those abilities, but there's something going on in the background where you could make a very specialist setup, but I didn't want to. So we've defended our base, we're now going to go and attack the other side of this island we're on, supposedly to steal fuel for our train helicopter thing. And I'll talk very briefly about the economy here. Very simple. You collect coal, that's your main resource, and you collect electricity. The electricity just sort of appears. You put down these pylons, you can see one towards the middle of the screen there, and they just give you electricity. It's implied that they're lightning rods, and they're being struck by lightning all the time, but they aren't. So I don't know. You can get electricity somehow, and you can collect coal, and by combining coal and electricity, you can make a skunk lion, and that's the economy. So pretty basic. Your main goal will just be to find coal, because there is a finite amount of coal on the map, and basically everything you do needs coal. And the enemy will be using it up as well. So there is a rush aspect. If you just sit in your base, the enemy will just collect all the resources on the map, and you'll almost certainly lose. So you need to pay attention, and this was something that surprised me. It's a surprisingly difficult and engaging RTS, where you really need to push against the enemy, because you totally can run out of resources real easy. I suppose just the casual theme of the game, the whimsical nature of it, made me think that it will be an easy game overall, or aimed at people who aren't really into strategy games. I would describe this as a relatively hard strategy game, in that there's massive benefits to be had from being hugely aggressive and focusing on micro and trying to claim as much map control and resource control as early as possible. And the AI will be relentlessly doing this against you, so you need to be at least as relentless as they are. Well, we'll get into that as we see some real examples. So we storm forward with a variety of things. I think we've got a wolf creature in here as well as the porcupine and the skunk thing. And the enemy are going to come at us with different things. This is one aspect of the game that needs to be mentioned. It's not like you both have the same set of animals and you're competing for who has the better design. Usually the other side will have different animals. So you're kind of using what you have to react to what it seems they have, and you'll have to find out what units they have in each stage, which makes each stage more different than in a usual RTS, because you can't really know what the enemy is going to come at you with, and what sort of stats they're going to have, or what approach might work. Now, there aren't very many approaches, so it's not like there's going to be huge variety there. But it was something. The idea was pretty good, which is probably my overall design thoughts on this game, that the idea was pretty good, it just needs to go further. We captured the genetic amplifier. This is a building that we can now make, which allows you to spend a very small amount of resources to permanently buff all units of a given animal type, or an animal design, I should say. So if you're going to build more than one or two of a particular design, you might as well buff them up as well, because it doesn't cost very much. You need to redo the buffs at the start of each stage, but it's pretty useful to have that little upgrade ability. Very nice. We go on to storm the enemy base on this island, losing most of my stuff by the looks of things. I just wasn't replenishing my losses, I suppose, because I couldn't be bothered. And we hack our way through to start destroying this enemy base. One thing that's going to become clear as we go on is that it can be difficult to wrangle your soldiers and keep them under control. And by soldiers I mean animals, of course. Well, we'll get to that. We go into the next stage where we need to hunt down the head honcho of the enemy henchman, Whitey Hooten. And along the way, Rex is giving us this speech about how he was a journalist in the Spanish Civil War. Basically, he's like a Hemingway character. He's all cool and stuff. And he's probably in some way angry flirting, but I think he's also just being traumatized. He hates war, but here it is, another war for him, but this time it's a war where we're sending dogs against them and he doesn't have to do anything, so maybe it's not so bad. Is this the future of war? Well, it looks like it. It's pretty effective so far. I guess we could go and get guns, but just turning coal into dogs and letting them loose is going pretty well also. So we advance up this map, and well, we start to see in this battle that takes place here a little bit of the wrangling problems I was mentioning. Essentially, all of your units, by default, have their behavior to automatically attack anything in their line of sight. But it doesn't work the same way for melee units as it does for ranged units, so you get these random issues. I think it's that ranged units won't aggro onto things that are in their line of sight, only things that are in their ranged attack range. But then they'll follow them if the thing leaves ranged attack range, so they can get drawn off like that, whereas melee units will just run at things that come near them. And you can get situations where essentially if you're trying to keep any kind of formation where like your tank units are protecting the ranged units, things will just mix up all over the place and it's very hard to do. And you get lots of cases where the melee units, they charge to attack one enemy, and then there's more enemies behind that, so they charge even further, and your ranged units don't automatically follow them. So you need to micro the fights, basically, and keep everything very close together. And I struggled with that for a bit. Well, it was good enough, I suppose, because we do win and move on. Another thing to mention is that this cloud you can see appearing, this skunk ability, I think it stops ranged units from attacking, or they can't shoot into the cloud, something like that. This only really happens on the first couple of stages, so my focus on going mostly for ranged units wasn't very good really. So in retrospect, in the first couple of stages you should spam melee units, because ranged units will always be debuffed by this skunk thing going off all the time, and then after that ranged units will become pretty good. Although in situations like this, where only a few melee units can attack the enemy at once but all of my ranged units can, that's where the DPS is going to start coming in. Well anyway, we've captured this enemy base, and I've brought over one of my own henchmen to start building up the base myself. As you might have noted, somewhere along the way we also became an evil mad scientist, and we also have henchmen. I think it's implied that some of Upton Julius's henchmen are defecting to our side, and they're going to fight against the mad science by doing mad science of exactly equal caliber. We are going to show the world our peaceful ways by force, and that sort of thing. I decided to invent a new animal now because I needed something to act as a tank, so we have this bear-ram combo, something that can just stand in front of the formation and not die very much. This combo gives the herding special ability. That means that if they stand in groups of more than 4, I think it is, they all get defense buffs, so they're extra tanky. There's my group right there, completely out of position when the AI comes and attacks my main base. We haven't unlocked base defenses yet, so I have to just have a few units standing around, and I did have a few standing in my base in case this happened. So it's good to see that the AI did bother to actively make a raiding party and come down to attack us. It probably would have been acceptable for the AI to do absolutely nothing in a game like this, especially early in the game. They could just stand there and aggro when you get close to them. I even think that in Dawn of War it was like that, the later strategy title from the same developer. Well anyway, it's more like a skirmish game where they're building resources, they're leveling up, they're getting the techs, and they're trying to attack your base and generally outplay you to some extent. It's just that in the early stages of the game, you'll tend to have more resources than they do, so you can just spam more stuff than them and win because of that. Now here I am spamming myself into one of the enemy bases. The Ram squadron is doing its thing. You can see them glowing blue. That means they're getting that defense buff from being close to each other. You can also perhaps tell the extent to which they're doing their own thing. I'm trying to wrangle them here and get them to deliberately attack the towers rather than the coal gatherers or something. Well, it doesn't matter in this case. We'll see some cases of micro coming into play more later on. We're actually messing up pretty big here, little did I realize, because we actually had an objective on this stage to capture one of the enemy's defense towers so that we could unlock the defense tower. That means if you destroy the enemy's defense towers, you fail that objective. And this also makes you fail the entire mission, as it turns out. We end up getting kicked to a score menu, and that was that. I was pretty mad about this. I was just like, oh, like I didn't realize it was that big a deal, or there wasn't a tower somewhere else I could just get, or something. Well, essentially you had to have Lucy with you in the frontline squad so she could research the tower by being close to it. The good news is that after every story event it does leave an autosave, so I didn't have to go back that far to try this assault again. Now Lucy is somewhere in the crowd here. The risk here, and the reason I wouldn't bring the story characters normally, is that you also automatically lose if these story characters die. So you want to keep them out of the action as much as possible, although Lucy actually has an ability, an offensive ability, where she can automatically destroy enemy buildings by touching them, like she's demolishing them like a Command and Conquer character or something. Pretty good stuff. Rex also actually has various combat abilities that I didn't really notice until much later in the game, so we'll see that. Anyway, this time we got the tower, we take out all the enemy bases on the island, and the head honcho of the enemy says that if we're looking for our father, he's right there. And it turns out we were actually standing right next to this gigantic improvised grave, and that was the grave of our father all along. I think we might now be back where we were in the beginning when Upton Julius came to attack us or something. Not quite sure what's going on, but the point is, our guy now has a revenge mission. This time, it's even more personal than before, and I think Lucy might also be on a revenge mission. Well, generally, we need to stop the mad science, because clearly it's gone out of control. Our only option is to become an even madder scientist, and then once we've defeated the less mad scientists, I don't know, wipe our own memories, kill ourselves, nuke the entire island, in some way make it so that humans can't combine praying mantises with tigers anymore, because that's just too much power. People go wild when they can command mantis tigers to do their bidding. As it turns out, there's probably another Hemingway novel to be found in that storyline. This game actually is based on a book I seem to recall reading on the wiki. It might have been an H.G. Wells book or something, I forget the name. Well, there you go, it's not an entirely original concept after all, that's a shame, but they've taken an impossible creature by combining Hemingway with H.G. Wells to create a far superior media product, Impossible Creatures for the PC. We end up on another island. It's time to take out Whitey Hooton and his gang by capturing this place. Along the way, I'm getting more into the swing of things. Looks like I'm bothering to assign control groups to some of my units, or just all of them looks like. I'm having all of the units be in one control group. Well, that's easy enough. My second control group is the characters following behind here, because my new plan is to play in a very meta RTS way, to expand as quickly as possible, having cottoned on to that being very advantageous. So as my frontline units go forwards, we're going to have the main characters be just behind, because Lucy can constantly slap down unit production buildings or defences as we go. So this gives me the option to make new bases as we advance, and this is important, because usually the resources you'll need to continue playing the map will be in the enemy's bases, so you need to get in there real fast, take out bases and build your own bases on the same places in order to secure those locations. But of course, by doing so, you're going to spread yourself thin, both in terms of having many places to defend and also in terms of not fulfilling your pop cap. In order to quickly take an enemy base as soon as possible, you might want to attack before you finish building the maximum army size you're allowed. So the army will be less effective because of that perhaps, but it may be important to get the enemy bases as early as possible, simply because the enemy is actually playing against you. So if I wait a long time to attack these bases, they'll probably be more defended, so it might be worth it to make some kind of timing attack and just go for it as early as possible. Well, it works on this map at least. We later discover an enemy base sitting in a lake towards the top left of the map. This is because the game also has naval combat of a sort. You can make water units or water animals and use them for various things, and because all of the maps take place on islands, there's always the opportunity to send naval units around the edge of the map to do various things. Usually the maps are designed to make that less effective, so there'll be cliffs everywhere that stop units from either getting off or on to the land. However, one such gap in those cliffs is in our base, and you can see we're being punished for this. We're being attacked by some sort of orca polar bear combo, so many fish units can be given land unit legs to make them amphibious. And of course that gives them extra options. They can attack either as regular units or just swim off into the sea and be immune to counterattack or attack in weird places, so amphibious units are particularly useful for that. In this case, I think I spat out a few units to fight the orca at home, although I was also considering bringing tons of stuff home to do it as well. Well, we're going to win that small battle. I think I eventually put defensive towers facing the other direction to get away with that, and then went on to mass up towards the pop cap and then spam the enemy base. At this stage we're safe to sit around and mass units because we control most of the resources on the map. If the entire battle just becomes a slog of just throwing units at each other, we'll win because ultimately we'll have more units, and indeed we do win. And the guy we were hunting down, who possibly was something to do with killing our father, I don't know, probably not. Well, he dies in a tragic boat accident or something. I think his main base was a boat. And we sank it by having too many goats lick it or what have you. Something happened, killed some guy, victory. We move on to the next island, where now we're going to use the fact we've unlocked naval units to our advantage. We're now somewhere further north with a nicer climate that has access to giraffes and to archerfish. And it turns out if you slap the head of an archerfish on top of a giraffe, you can get the archerfish's projectile attack spitting water at things on a giraffe, and we can use that to try and put out these fires. So that's the early part of the mission. Stuff's on fire. We're going to save the locals from the fire by having an archerfish spit at them. You might wonder where the archerfish are getting the stuff to spit from, since they're supposed to be spitting the water that they're in. If you take them out of the water, they can still do it. Well, the game is called Impossible Creatures, so perhaps I'm imagining a game called Plausible Hybrids, where taking a fish out of water actually does have a negative effect. Well, not in this case. Just stitch the fish head to a giraffe. You're in business. You've got yourself what is effectively an artillery unit in the game. They work a bit differently to normal ranged units in that they have area of effect damage, and we'll see the importance of that in a bit. It turns out, while I was focusing on putting out one of the fires, there was actually another part of the fire that I didn't notice that was essentially next to our base, and by not looking at it for ages, it spread into our base and took out a bunch of my buildings, so that was clever. I also discovered along the way, though, that while the game implied we were supposed to be putting out the fires using specifically this unit that spits water, you can see on the right, the porcupines can also put out the fire. The fire is just like an enemy, so you can just fight the fire with units, and this whole use the fish thing was just a gimmick. Well, we've got a whole bunch of giraffe fish coming up now, and they are going to come in useful for other things too. So with the fires put out, we are discovered by the enemy faction on this island. There's another goon of Upton Julius, a Cruella de Vil style villain who flies the helicopter around and bombs native villages for fun and such. So now we've got to take down this person, and we're going to do it with a whole bunch of giraffes, probably. And of course, they also have a whole bunch of random things to throw at us. So the nice thing about putting the fish head on the giraffe body is it makes the giraffe be considered an amphibious unit. So now the giraffes can swim around and shoot up onto the islands, which of course is very useful. Having some seaborne artillery is going to be very frequently applicable, since there are so many places on the map that are always close to water, especially around the outside. You can bombard enemies with these attacks. The enemy do have a few things that can shoot back at us, but this is a pretty nice strategy. You can see I started spamming more of my fire hoses to get more of this going. I liked the idea. The thing is, aside from doing that, they're less useful. So we have a case here where I need to attack forwards against this enemy base that's fortified and such. They're coming at us with flying units now as well, and a few ground units sneaking in. Don't know what those things coming in are, but the point is, once a general fight breaks out, the artillery becomes much less useful because of the wrangling issue again. They're going to be constantly shooting all over the place and running towards the enemy and stuff. And because the artillery attacks have area of effect damage, the probability that you're firing at yourself and killing your own units becomes extreme. In fact, when the enemy attack with flyers, it's guaranteed, because they're right on top of you. The artillery will just shoot at themselves and die. So they're very difficult to work with in general combat engagements. Looks like it's time for me to move out of my base. We're not doing so well on the economy now. This is what I meant about the difficulty being relatively high. We already need to be where we are now, so even though I feel like I'm pushing very aggressively, if I'd pushed any less aggressively, we'd be out of this game by now. We'd have to start again. So we're hanging on. My artillery fish are now causing issues because there are anti-aircraft towers that we can capture, so Lucy is complaining that I keep shooting at them. Well, we can shoot at other stuff instead, but again, just the issues will arise. Once your melee units are blocking the enemy from the artillery will fire at your melee units and they'll die real fast. We're also being hit by enemy artillery units, getting some very effective damage. I think this is a nice use of artillery, just sending in one unit to sacrifice itself. Because if you can get a couple of shots off into a group of units, you'll do tons of damage, and it might be worth the trade of just losing one unit to achieve that. We'll see a bit more of that later. But yes, situations like this, we're getting annihilated. We have way too many giraffes. They're just shooting at themselves as flying units fly all around them. Luckily, we've got Lucy up here, so we're going to start making a forward base. This is one of my favorite old-school RTS strategies, to locate the enemy's hard points and the bases you want to attack, and just make your base directly in front of it. I always enjoy when you have the freedom to build whenever you want, or wherever you want, so that you can do weird things like that. It's nice to just have a base wall. So we're going to start rebuilding our army right in front of where it needs to be, which will also have the effect of defending our other bases, although not from flying units, of course. So, I liked what I was seeing here overall, basically, but after immediately falling in love with the archer giraffe, I'm now annoyed by them, because every time I make a unit, they get killed by said archer giraffes attacking while we're trying to fight in melee. You can turn off fire at will on these things, although it's not off by default, so like as you build them, you need to select them and turn it off if you don't want them to be firing at everything they can see, and that is helpful. So essentially having a group of very carefully manually controlled artillery giraffes might be useful, but using them as a frontline unit, not very useful. I think keeping them in the water is a better strat, and you'll see me using that a bit later on. For now, I'm just sort of using them in vain, trying not to shoot my own units too much. But I need micro to do that, and the bigger the fight is, the less likely that's going to happen. I have no idea how much friendly fire damage I took to this ultimately, but it was probably a fair bit. At least we've discovered there's another enemy base right there, so we can capture the enemy's resource points and get them for ourselves. But again, if I didn't do that quickly, the enemy would just have taken all the resources and I'd be out of options. So again, being hyper-aggressive seems very much a requirement of the game. And while I'm mentioning this over and over just because it isn't necessarily how the game teaches you to play it. I feel like this is old school to the point when they might have just expected you to be good at RTS, like before you came in. It doesn't have any tutorial information saying, like, by the way, you need to push out real fast because the resources on the map are dwindling the longer you wait. You have to work that out by trial and error. It was the past. Working things out by trial and error was supposed to be part of the fun because there weren't many games to play. People's time wasn't very valuable in the past. You know how it was. Well, anyway, just something to mention in a more futuristic game design sense. The game is probably a bit too hard, I would say, or at least needs more tutorializing. It doesn't affect me too much because I'm an uber gamer, as I said, but I have sympathies for others, or like kids who might try to play this thinking it's a jovial game and finding it's actually a relatively brutal strategy experience. A bit later, we've switched out to trying to use the porcupines as our main ranged combat unit. We're also being raided back in our base. I've got one defense tower here. Interestingly, the defense towers can attack aerial units, often in these games. It will be the case that a ground thing can't interact with an air thing. But here, there is the ground turret and an anti-air turret that is just better against aerial units but can't attack on the ground. So perhaps spamming loads of ground turrets is the more versatile option, but air turrets are just really powerful. Something, we got attacked in our base, but we got away with it. Good work from the AI for bothering to do that. Now it's time for some micro-heavy advance. Once I massed up this army of a more versatile selection of things, I was able to push on forwards. And you can see a little bit of the micro I'm trying to do, keeping the artillery out of the fight, just blowing up buildings, and when they're near the fight, trying to have them selected and manually directing their targeting, so that they don't accidentally start trying to fire at the enemy. It can be done, but it's a little bit of a hassle to sort out. A lot of micro is required, and that stops you from controlling the melee units who are wildly charging in all over the place as usual. Still, we are advancing, and to add to the micro here, I also had to bring up Lucy to capture the air factory thing. Now we're allowed to build air units as well, and we'll see some of those in a second. I decided to go to ground here and fortify at the choke point in front of the enemy's base. So we're being attacked by billions of things. I've got barely any units here because I'm relying on turrets instead. But meanwhile, I'm doing that thing I mentioned earlier, having our amphibious artillery just be around the edge of the map shooting in. The enemy has loads of base buildings quite close to the edge of the island, so we can take out a bunch of stuff via that method. While only a few units defend our base, this is a lot of hassle again because units in your base will constantly charge out of it to engage approaching enemy units, and then if there's another one behind them, which there often is, they will charge even further out and they'll just disappear off to various places while you're not fully paying attention. There's just loads of micro, again a surprisingly difficult setup for what kind of feels like a kid's game. Well, you can see my eventual strategy. We've switched to using polar bear wolves, so a melee unit that has the polar bear's swimming ability, a very slow swimming ability, but that group is now going to swim to the back of the enemy's base while we focus on defending with mainly towers and a few porcupines. The towers don't contribute to your pop cap, another bold defensive building decision from the designers there, so that means there is some advantage to be had in forcing the enemy to fight your defenses, putting loads of defenses at the front of the enemy's base to do the main fight, so you can focus all of your pop cap on your cheeky group like I'm doing now, so I have a bigger group attacking from behind as a result of committing to the defenses. However, it's not a very versatile group, it's mainly just melee units, and they do suffer because Melee units are hard to control, as I keep saying, so they're running off all over the place here. We need to try and make sure they attack the enemy's artillery units as quickly as possible and not get stuck in a melee where the artillery is raining down upon them. What I could have done is actually send henchmen to the back as well. I didn't realize this for a while, but henchmen can swim, so I could set up a base behind the enemy's base, which would have made my rear attack more effective. Instead, I went for this. I decided to try something aerial. I combined a dragonfly with a lobster, making an aerial unit that has bonus damage against buildings. That's what the lobster claws add to the equation. That means we can just attack the enemy base and try to out-economy the enemy effectively here. I can just keep spamming the lobsters, ignoring the enemy units and taking out their buildings, in particular trying to take out their unit production buildings. The only thing we actually need to do to finish this stage is take out one enemy building, their lab building, which is like the town centre in Age of Empires talk. It's that grey thing right there. It is defended by an anti-air tower right now, and you struggle a little bit with the air units, I found, because they're very unmaneuverable, surprisingly. They can't hover, they have to fly forwards, and they have very large turning circles, so I guess that's how it's balanced effectively. You have very little control over where specifically your air units will go because they just fly all over the screen. They're very likely to fly into range of enemy units and aggro them, or to fly into range of anti-air towers and just die in one hit. So I found that the attrition rate on my lobster dragonflies was extremely high. At the same time, I'm just going to keep spamming them. That's my plan now. We've sort of locked down for this. We're not going to do anything else but spam the lobsters at the enemy's buildings until they are all destroyed, since that is all we need to do. We're suffering slightly from the fact the enemy actually have other base areas on the map that I hadn't destroyed. So they were still producing units while I was attacking their main base. We could have done this in a more comprehensive way to make it neater, I suppose. Well, it works out in the end. But we just progress straight into another stage because the enemy villain just goes away to this other island. So here's the real showdown. And this is the stage for me. This stage was a real trial by fire because for whatever reason, it turned out to be a difficulty spike. Every stage after this, in my opinion, was easier than this one. But perhaps that was because of the lessons that I learned in this first sort of full-on difficult stage where the enemy is really playing against you. So let's see what happens. To start off, I was going for some sort of boom build where I've mostly just built loads of henchmen to collect the coal as soon as possible. We're not building any units, and I'm trying to wall off my base, and we'll put towers down there as well. This henchman spam build isn't very good, because if you pay attention to your henchmen mining coal, they tend to wait around a lot if there are other henchmen there. Like, they block each other's access to the coal quite a bit. And the amount of henchmen I have now is about the amount where it's going to start becoming a problem. So I can't really go further in a boom build. I wonder if that's a design choice. Like, you could make 25 henchmen at the start and just take all of your coal and then like research everything and just spam the enemy with a high tier army without having left your base, if you have enough base defenses to fight any battles that take place during that time. That was sort of what I was going for here, but it probably wouldn't have worked if I really committed to it. Luckily, I didn't really commit to it. I'm going to start making some units now. We are under attack as well. As you can see, we quickly spam out some towers just in time to deal with this. So we've got our foothold, but can we hold on to it? I now really struggled to get out of our base because we were just under attack all the time, and I'm having the issue, well, the same thing I mentioned earlier, that my melee units are running off while I'm selecting something else, and the micro is building up because I'm trying to still use a small group of artillery. We can use the artillery to take out buildings such as this one, but your melee units go and stand next to the buildings automatically. So my artillery are killing my own units right now, the exact thing that I was complaining about before. I just can't stop it happening, because even when I see it, I'm always in the middle of thinking about doing something else. The micro's a little bit too much for me here. What we're going to do is run for it. I've still got my towers at the base, so if we fight here, we'll be in a bit of luck. And you can see what I'm trying to do. I'm buying time to mass the flying lobsters at the back, thinking maybe I'll swoop forwards and take out some enemy production. That is not going to be happening, because flying units are kind of difficult to use in this game. Most maps are covered in anti-air towers right at the start, so the enemy have their base defenses everywhere. To stop you, I suppose, just rushing down the enemy base with a flying attack. but the downside is you actually can't really do anything with a flying attack as a result. All the things you might want to do with the advantage of being able to fly over terrain has been accounted for by the developers. So it doesn't work very well. We're also being attacked from the sea. They have this whale that's shooting long-range electric beams. Lucy dies in the madness. You can see I was trying to establish defenses like further forward to give myself some more space. So we failed. We come back into the mission again, and I thought maybe I just need a better unit. We have unlocked a few more animals that I haven't used yet. So I'm looking at something with a chameleon. I saw the enemy using the chameleon. It has a long-range tongue attack, which is quite useful. The thing is, there is a secret to making units that I didn't really understand at all until I think later in this stage, so we'll see that later. For now, my main focus was just to make some kind of ranged unit, and for it to not be too expensive so I can get loads of them out together to attack simultaneously. I was really hoping that this would be the one. A cheap dragonfly chameleon with a ranged and a powerful melee attack and regenerating health. I thought all this together will be good because we can just have a flock of these over our army constantly shooting down at everything. But as I said, all flying units in the game fly like birds. So to attack an enemy, they have to fly towards and over it, even if it's a ranged attack. Which means you're constantly going behind enemy lines and constantly dying to something else with flying units. So this isn't really going to work, but let's see it not working here. I'm being vigorous here about trying to move forwards with this creeping entrenchment, trying to build just a little bit further forwards each time I advance, using my artillery to take out the enemy's air towers to clear up some space to operate near our natural expansion point. And this issue of clearing up space is again going to be the downside of trying to rely on a flyer, because we have to use our artillery or something to take out the enemy's anti-air towers, which are everywhere. I have to advance very carefully. The enemy are just counter-artillerying my artillery all the time, spamming things out. And one issue we're facing is that their stats are simply better than mine. We're going to move towards talking about stats in this video. We're not really looking at them in this case, so I didn't really know the extent to which I had a disadvantage, but the enemy's armadillos have real high defense, so it's hard to kill them, and they have the same range and perhaps more attack than me. Because how much attack a unit has, well, it's based on something that we'll talk about later. It's not entirely obvious. So we are being pounded by units that are hard for us to kill, and it's hard for me to do the micro, because every time I deploy artillery, I end up shooting myself, but I need the artillery to shoot back at their artillery. Or we can run out with melee units, but then they have the lack of control problem as well. We'll come to the real solution in a second. Here's what I tried to do. I just took all of my flyers and I thought, can we go and take out their economy? Can we stop them attacking us for a bit? But our flying troop gets absolutely obliterated when we discover the hard way that this other enemy base where the enemy's flying attacks were coming from is completely defended. I ended up thinking, I need a unit that's generally a ranged unit that I can mass all over the place and is good enough to work in this scenario. Which brings us to the one. I decided to put all of my faith in this one unit. It's a chameleon lobster, and my faith is going to be well placed. Because the lobster element gives it very high defense because of the shell, the chameleon element gives it this relatively long range but low damage licking attack. But what the game doesn't tell you is that the DPS is pretty high, or to put it another way, it licks a lot. So it actually does surprisingly good range damage, and it has regenerating health on top of that high defense. So the idea is that the enemy are coming at us with small groups constantly, but if they can't completely kill us, we'll regenerate our health. That allows me to mass relatively quickly. We still need to be careful, as you can see here, because the lobsters are going to get killed by the artillery, but there is one other solution. These lobsters have pretty high melee attack as well. So if I'm good enough with the micro, which is only really going to be possible in tiny fights like this one, if you close into melee range, they'll stop artillerying you and you can go for a melee fight instead, which works in our favour even though the armadillo has super high defense. Only a little bit higher actually than my lobsters, as I seem to recall. Also, by massing ranged ground units, you can ignore the anti-air towers, but the enemy's flyers are still attacked. All ranged ground units are also anti-air units. So this is the most versatile setup as far as I'm concerned. Just spamming this. Ideally, we'd have something quick to run forwards and get the enemy's artillery into melee. And we saw just there, I took decent casualties advancing on the enemy. I probably have the economic advantage though. These lobsters are among the cheapest things in the game. These artillery units the enemy are using are probably more expensive. We can't know that at this stage, but I assume it's true. Essentially, the massing begins to work. We're dying slower than before with the other selection of units. It's taking some real micro to get this to work. But the number of lobsters I had was gradually going up throughout the fights, and we got to a critical mass point when we can kill them before they kill any one of us, and then of course it spirals out of control because of our regenerating health. If they can't kill one of us with their attacks, then their attacks are just wasted. We lose no resources, they lose all the resources they put into the attack. And we can start churning our way forwards with our low damage but high rate of fire tongues all over the place. The fact we can form many ranks and shoot through each other means we can actually get off quite a lot of attacks, whereas the flyers and melee units coming at us are generally not applying damage while they're in battle. So this is the nice efficiency of DPS, or ranged DPS specifically, in old school strategy games. It always tends to be like this. And now we've finally got it going. We start rampaging forwards with this just single blob of all lobsters, working much better than anything I had before. No artillery to micro, so we're not killing our own units anymore. It's generally easier because you can attack move with a blob of lobsters and they'll just kill everything that comes near them automatically, so that reduces the micro as well. Freeing up me to do, well, advancing micro with the henchmen. You can see I've been entrenching constantly behind my advance, ready to go back if I need to, and ready to make more units to pump into the blob as we go as well. And we managed to push far forward enough to stop the enemy's local production. The way this map works is that it's split into two sections, so by taking out the base that's near us, they then can't attack us with land units, only air units. But that works both ways, of course, so we capture this helicopter base. We're going to have some more units as a result of this that we'll see. But the most important thing to know is that we are now cut off from the rest of the enemy that we need to attack. But they're not necessarily as cut off from us. We're going to get into a few tricks here, and I might even start to learn how the game's stats work because of the new challenges that arose. That's what makes this the stage. After having those early difficulties trying to get out of my base and trying new things to make it work and finally achieving something, I was eventually stumped by how the next part of this stage goes, and the enemy are using a few tricks on me as well, so let's get into it.
Sounds like a plan.
First, we're pushed into this frantic defense of our new base. We have to defend the helicopter pad, and the enemy are sending this massive wave to take it down. And I didn't have that much stuff here, so we're defending with not a pop-capped army or anything, and we're getting absolutely obliterated by a massive artillery barrage from back there, and there's not too much we can do until we've killed everything else. Then we can try and charge in and get them to shoot themselves. Again, that's really our main option here. We have so many The Ones who aren't very good against the artillery. We don't have many options.
What's next?
Well, I've got Rex hiding at the back here. One thing I didn't realise until way later in the game is that Rex is actually an offensive unit. I thought all he could do was collect animal DNA for you. That was his role. He can actually shoot at the enemy if you target them. I just never did it, and he doesn't do it automatically, unlike everything else. So I suppose that contributed to me never realising he could do it. And he's actually really powerful if you do order him to attack. Lucy, as you can see, is barely alive, and I just about made a tower that aggroes the enemy that was killing her, so that tower will save her with barely any health. We are just about hanging on, and now I'm spamming out the polar bears simply to run in amongst the enemy artillery to make them shoot themselves some more, and maybe do some melee damage too. Rex can kill most units, by the way, in one hit, so I'm basically missing out on tons of free kill opportunities here. But the good news is that the NPC who is repairing the helicopter right now as part of the story event is functionally invincible. So we keep repairing the helicopter throughout and it doesn't die, and eventually our base is cleared out. We've just barely hung on. But the battle doesn't really end here, because the enemy just keep coming forever. And I don't know if this is intentional or a glitch or something, because we end up stuck here in a perpetual battle for the rest of the stage. The enemy are just appearing from the water just outside our base, so I have to leave my army there to just fight them whenever they appear. But now that we have the helicopter, we can go and try to make a base on the other side of the island. So that's where they're probably trying to go with this. We've captured the helicopter, we'll make a new base on the other side of the mountains, and then go from there. But there are going to be several things that make that particularly difficult. what I figured I'd be able to do is move my army through what appears to be a tunnel. You can see the enemy keep just appearing here. I thought maybe it's a tunnel and they're coming out, like so they're being produced on the other side and are coming through to our side. There's no passable terrain, so either something scripted is teleporting them in, or perhaps more likely, they're just spawning. We're just facing an infinitely spawning set of enemies that comes out of that hole as a sort of vague thing to make it look less like they're just spawning in your base. Not quite sure. Well, while I was looking at that, obviously things are going very poorly with my landing attempt. I thought maybe the enemy wouldn't see me doing this, but they have units all over the place over here. I suppose all the land units that weren't attacking us that the enemy have built can now immediately attack you as you land, making it difficult. I'm starting to set up an air factory here, thinking maybe we'll try and attack from the air with more units again. And I'm also trying this little plan of building really in the corner. Again, trying to make it so that the AI won't see me. I don't know if the AI actually has Fog of War. It's one of those games where it probably doesn't, because it would be so much easier to program the AI if it didn't have Fog of War, so they probably didn't give it. Well, we've got another issue back at home. This is less of an issue, but we are being attacked from the sea by those killer whales that shoot lightning once again. It doesn't matter so much because we've used up all the resources over here. I don't really need this base. I tried to send a few flyers to take down this whale. Well, it has this area of effect attack that kills them all instantly, so that did not go very well. I think they did eventually get killed by some towers or something. Well, we've also taken some damage at our new landing point while I wasn't looking, so clearly we were discovered and attacked, but the tower I put down was able to fend off the enemy. I kept trying with that, and we're still fighting at that weird tunnel thing. We're going to start having fewer units here because it's wasting our pop cap just defending that random spot infinitely. The landing attempt has failed, as you can see. They've discovered us and they have a few units here, and that's going to be enough to take us out. I was despairing a bit to look at their units and see their stats. I was like, they have like 50% more range, triple damage, 5 times more health than us. Why are their units just so much better than ours? And, well, this is me just not knowing, looking at my numbers, being like, my numbers are low. Tried switching the animals to different things, being like, how do I make these numbers higher? I didn't find out this time, but we're getting closer and closer to finding out how to get good numbers on the animals. It's basically a secret that I'm about to discover. I was figuring that because we're both using chameleons as our main ranged unit, shouldn't we both be doing the same amount of ranged damage? And was like, why is their ranged damage way higher than mine? Why are their tongues longer? What's going on? This could possibly just be explained by the fact that you're supposed to be facing an asymmetric war where the enemy have different animals to you, like the armadillo thing here. And I thought maybe it's just supposed to be this hard, but we actually can straight up make better units, and we're going to later. For now, though, I had a plan in mind. I figured, you know what, most of my army is amphibious. Let's just try and find a way to land on the enemy side of the island somewhere. You can actually see through the fog of war at any stage, so it would have been possible for me to know in advance that I can't do this, but we're going to find out the hard way anyway. The long story short is that there's no part of the other side of the island that doesn't have cliffs that stop you bringing things from the sea to the land. And you can tell what they're doing with this because you've just unlocked the helicopter unit. It's trying to get you to do some sort of landing, basically. This makes sense. But the landing has failed, and I suppose we're now just going to experience the failure of the other possible way of doing it. And they can't really let you just go in by sea because you could have done that before capturing the helicopter, and that would probably mess something up. So, fine, I accept that I can't do a naval strategy on this stage at the very least, but it's still a shame that it didn't work, I suppose. I can do this strategy, the thing from earlier, where we bombard with sea artillery. The only issue is because the enemy are also spamming artillery themselves, it's going to be very easy for them to shoot back, and it takes a lot of micro to dodge those shots, and we're probably not going to do so well. We did take out the enemy's naval production, though, so we're not going to be attacked by killer whales anymore. That's something, but doesn't matter very much. I tried to do a combined landing and sea support thing, but I picked a bad place to do it, essentially. I tried to build a creature chamber in a spot that can be attacked from a few different directions and was seen by the enemy really fast, so even having the lobsters nearby didn't really change the effect of that landing compared to the others. But then I had more luck with this one. I went back to landing right in the corner of the map, because this spot means the enemy have to walk really near the sea to get down to that corner, and having all of my artillery nearby means we bombard enemy units as they come in. buying more time for me to build stuff. But speaking of time, we're almost out of time in terms of resources. You can see at the top, the enemy are mining the last set of resources on the map, the one that I need to use here to make my new base to do the rest of the stage. So if I wait too long, I simply won't be able to do this at all. Well, we have more luck, as I said. We've established something here, with the artillery providing both damage and a distraction to the enemy. So we put down some towers and some unit production and start moving forwards, but we'll immediately have problems, because as we move forwards, we're going to have to rely on our units again, and they're just straight up worse than what the enemy have. Whether we're trading efficiently resource-wise, I don't know, because while our units may be worse, they're also pretty cheap. So maybe just grinding like this could be okay. That's going to be very hard to tell, but it certainly feels like we're in a weak position in terms of our build. Well, all I can do for now is keep spamming to see what happens. It's hard for us to establish a base over there, by the way, because you can't make henchmen, your generic economy unit, anywhere except in your main base. And here is that main base. Here's how things are going back over there. There are billions of artillery units attacking it. How did this happen? Well, eventually, the constantly spawning guys at that tunnel overcame whatever I had defending it, and after that they just kept spawning and running towards our base, and eventually they've grouped up into this enormous blob that is spamming their way in. And there is not too much we can do about that at this stage, unfortunately. You can see I'm busy trying to micro something else, because while we can't make henchmen in the new location, what I can do is use the helicopter to drag one henchman at a time over there. Lots of micro required, but it can be done. It just can't really be done while your base is being absolutely annihilated at the same time. Lots of things to look at here. This is a real micro challenge. Well, I don't know if any amount of micro would actually save my base from this situation, but we're just going to calmly and carefully try to open this box with a henchman in it. My overall plan is to just spam out a couple of units towards these artillery units and hope they kill themselves once again. And the enemy will be wasting some time trying to take out my base defenses, because artillery aren't actually that good against buildings in this game, so it takes them a while to do it. Here's our two henchmen we've got over there so far. They can start mining, and we really need to, because we're almost out of resources at our other base. We're about to be out of options, and I presume the enemy will just keep getting these armadillos constantly. I kind of thought maybe we can take down this blob, but what I'm not paying attention to is that every 1 or 2 minutes, more armadillos are spawning somewhere and are coming into the back of the blob. So this is an endless battle right here. We can't get out of this. I keep saying they're spawning. I'm not 100% sure the enemy aren't buying them and then teleporting the units over here through some scripting or something like that. But we'll see in a second. I had a hint that maybe some cheats were involved. As things were going down, I started looking at my unit roster again, and I accidentally made this really good crocodile panther with way higher health and attack than most of my other things, and I thought this looks pretty good. And while it costs more to make a unit that's good like that, it costs, say, twice as much, but the unit you get is like 3 times as good, that sort of thing. So it seems to be economical to make good units, and that's especially true when you consider there's a pop cap. So if you can get enough good units, it's going to be way better to have loads of expensive units versus a really efficient to build unit, something like that. Well, it doesn't matter right now, because even with that now added to my roster, it's too late to do anything. Our base is being absolutely obliterated because the enemy just kept adding more units to the attack. Some flyers even came over to get involved. And that is going to be the end of that, unfortunately. But now we're looking at a post-game stats screen, and I noticed the enemy spent way more resources than they gathered, so that's possibly the first hint that some shenanigans are going on here. I don't know whether units being spawned for free would add to the coal spent stat, but in some way the enemy got 30 grand up on us somehow along the way in terms of units. You can also in this screen look at loads of detailed stats about units in particular, and it's saying here that the 1 is a pretty good unit, it seems, giving it a high efficiency score. And you can also check the enemy's units. The enemy have the Archadillo, that's the main armadillo thing that's giving me trouble. Also a very efficient unit according to these stats, so I'm guessing that's in terms of how much resources you put into that kind of unit and how much damage they did as a result. Well, I had to just leave, and I ended up coming back to look at the creature creator menu on the main menu, where you can experiment with any combination of creatures, including things you haven't actually captured in the campaign. And I eventually realized this size stat that I was just looking at here is essentially the thing. It actually says in the tooltip there, it affects other attributes including health and damage, potentially increasing them. Well, that's the secret. You just have to have a high size stat and it multiplies through your damage, and not just by a little bit as well. So all that really matters for making your creature is that you combine something that does the thing you want to do, in this case the chameleon, with something that's relatively big, like in this case the giraffe. So here I'm just making a big giraffe-sized chameleon. It's got double to triple the damage of the one, and way more health, less defense because it doesn't have the lobster scales, but it still has regenerating health as well. And while it costs a bit more to build, it's still worth it in my opinion. You get so much extra stat for your money if you just have a big thing. Here's another example, the crocodile giraffe. We could make this in the campaign right now. That's also big, it's going to have huge stats if I make it, and through the roof melee attack. So essentially, we discovered the secret. I need to stop making tiny dragonflies and lobster-sized creatures thinking that's so cool and efficient. It's the other way around. Just make a few giant things. Let's see if that philosophy will turn things around as I try the stage again. The era of mad strats is over, the era of mad science is here. I create the two, the upgrade to the one, a combination of a chameleon and a crocodile instead of a lobster. And it's just straight up way better. It has like 4 times the attack, like 8 times the health. You do have to reach a higher tech level to build it, but getting through the tech levels is actually pretty easy if you rush them down. It's pretty cheap to tech up to the maximum tech level right at the beginning of the game. So we now have a much more effective option that will do the same thing as in being a regenerating health, spammable ranged unit that will have all of the advantages about ranged units I was ranting about earlier. I also did a similar thing with making a melee unit to act as a front line. So we've got a gorilla crocodile and our chameleon crocodiles, just things that will have good size stats and general good stats overall. And the long story short here is that things are going to be way easier from here on in the game, now that we have units like this to play with. I only had to restart the stage from after capturing the helicopter thanks to the auto saves, which possibly was a risk because I'm starting it after using most of the resources on the map. But just getting out a few of these new crocodile units immediately turns the tide. You can see we've pushed out of our little base in the corner easily now. It's just way better, and we're going to continuously build more creature chambers moving up behind our front line. And because we're near the pop cap, we're going to get extra efficiency for using only expensive units. We don't have very many because I'm wasting the pop cap elsewhere still on henchmen and stuff that's stuck in the sea, but the idea is here, the experiment of just sending in a few really powerful gorillas and chameleon crocodile hybrids. Well, now I'm having no trouble whatsoever. This map appears to have no enemies on it. It's like we're playing on a different stage all of a sudden because the enemy are just being wiped out without me even looking at them all over the place. This is especially true because adding size to a ranged unit also increases its range. So these things, the 2s, have about 50% more range than the 1s on top of that 4 times multiplied damage. So they can now outrange, or at least equally range, the enemy's artillery, and can just kill them way easier, and we can still mass them almost as much because while the size stat is higher, they're not that much bigger on the screen for how much extra damage they're doing. So you can still get loads of them shooting at once. So that's the possible downside you might think there would be to having big units. Well, they're not that big, basically, so we have obliterated the meta of impossible creatures here. So from here on, this video is going to basically be a montage of me just swarming enemy maps with some good units. But we will have to actually change them up and make them better as we go on. And if you're very lucky, you might get to see me pulling out some mad strats once again, because things definitely do get harder and probably start to take into account the fact you're probably spamming tons of powerful units later on. Well, let's keep going, but essentially, if you've got this far in the video, you now know how to complete impossible creatures, but let's see what else happens as we go on. This stage ends up being pretty easy, as implied, because, well, once I had about 5 the 2s, that was it. Like, we only needed a couple of them to start pushing up towards the enemy base and completely break their offensive momentum. They're barely attacking us at all anymore, because anything they send at us just dies instantly, so they can't mass units, and once we advanced and took out their production and resource creation, we'll be fine. So we end up with an army that's only, say, 20 units strong out of our 50 pop cap, and it just completely wipes the floor with the enemy, so we've flipped the difficulty as I said earlier. We'll see how long this lasts. Here in the next stage, we start on our own little island, and we have to go and capture the next one. You can see they're sort of testing you to see whether you can deal with not being linked by land to the rest of the map. Well, of course we can, because all of our spam magical units are amphibious. The downside to that, by the way, is you have to build the water lab before you can spam anything out, so it means if you were attacked really early on, you're slightly more likely to not have any units at all. In this case, we're pretty defended against attacks, and we don't get attacked in our base until I'm done building my ball of the wands. So after about 10 minutes I sent them forwards and they began easily taking the enemy base, and while they're doing that we're still building up. We've started making a base on the enemy's island, and we filter in some of the twos as well, and then we just go for it. So we're skipping ahead now because I just attack moved all along this very linear stage, just absolutely slaughtering everything the enemy sent at us. I was planning on losing the wands in battle, and I was continuously putting unit production behind the front line, so I could filter in more the twos instead. But you might note there some of the wands just straight up didn't die, so we didn't even go for a full boom here. So while this plan does take a long time because this build is very weak against buildings, so every time we encounter enemy towers or bases, it takes us ages to kill them. You can see in the top right, it took about 20 minutes from the start of my advance to the end to get across the entire map. However, it was extremely easy, and this is partially because the game really is like a classic RTS. The enemy is also building up their resources and building up tech during the game, so it's not really a static challenge. That means if you attack really fast, the enemy won't have good units. If you can just race ahead of them, then rushing is very effective, and basically rushing is really good in every stage. It's just that the enemy start with tons of towers and stuff, so they have a bit of rush defense. But usually, the 1 or the 2 is enough to overcome a cluster of towers if you have enough of them. Here at the start of the next island, I'm going for the exact same strat. You might have also seen there I did use Rex to kill a unit, because on this map the enemy won't attack you for a while if you kill anything that comes close to your base. But for whatever reason, after learning that Rex could attack units because the story asked me to do it for once, I forgot again afterwards, as we'll see. Again, I'm being very aggressive, not even building up towards the pop cap, just making a group of the 1 and attacking as soon as possible, making a base behind that front line ready to add in some of the 2s once we're ready. However, this time, the amount of stuff coming out of this enemy base and the amount of towers was too much, so it seems I decided to pull back and conserve my wands, ready for a bigger push a bit later. And this time we do actually lose a whole bunch of the wands, and the 2 begins to take up the slack later with its higher stats. But the important thing here is that I'm just keeping pressure on the enemy, and they're spending resources constantly making units instead of going through the tech levels so that they'll have better units. So as long as my economy is strong enough, and we rely on the fact that our guys have regenerating health and will generally trade well, we can out-economy the enemy, which causes us to level up faster, and then there'll be a timing attack style window, where for a while I'll be the only one with endgame units. So if I can push forwards far enough in a period of 5 to 10 minutes before the AI also gets those techs and gets the endgame units, then we just have that advantage and we can press it as far as we can in that time. Again, the fact we can only do minimal damage to buildings means it's slow to advance, but it's very easy on the micro. We're barely losing anything. It's fine to just attack, move across the map, and then go back to microing the economy instead. And overall, I found this effective. So after about 10 minutes after leaving our base for the first time, we're already at the other side of the map and starting to attack the big enemy base. In this stage, though, there are 3 AI opponents. We've already killed one of them, but the other one that isn't the red player, the light blue player, is to our right somewhere, and they're attacking our base, so we do need to do some actual micro here to both keep the offensive going, because this entire strat just relies on momentum and killing the enemy as soon as possible, while defending our base. And we'll exploit the fact that putting down defenses doesn't increment your pop cap. So as long as we have the resources, and right now we do, you can really fortify your base with a bunch of quote-unquote free units that will defend infinitely and can be repaired for free as well. So we end up with situations like this, where our main base is being attacked. This is a threat because they can defeat us by taking out our lab building, but as long as there's enough stuff to gradually kill them, it's fine. Looks like I've stopped my offensive here because probably I want to get more popcap before pushing into the main and final section of the enemy's base. In this stage you don't need to take out all the enemies. It's another one where there's just one building to kill that's in the middle of the enemy's base somewhere. So we only have to kill about 2/3 of the enemy to safely get there. But you could probably do some crazy strat where you send in a bunch of flyers or naval artillery or something to do it for you. But here we're doing it the easy way, the attack move way, the 1, the 2 way. We just attack move into the enemy base and our guys will very slowly take out their main building, and we just wait around for that to happen, fortifying everything else against counterattacks until it does go down. Ultimately, we get the win. A simple enough plan, a simple enough map, and it does the business. So essentially at this stage in the game we've got this winning solution and we're just waiting to see, will it ever stop working? Well, for now we've done it, we've downed whoever that was, another henchman of the evil guy. Gravity 1, Velika 0, Rex says, and Lucy doesn't think it's funny at all. I think we still need to go and kill the evil henchman some more for revenge and stuff. I've forgotten the plot, it doesn't matter, but I do remember it being surprisingly detailed and even potentially having a few twists, as we'll see in a second. For the next stage, just another island to capture, but we're going to do another strat this time. I was talking about how good it was to rush the enemy as soon as possible. But on this stage, I'm going to do the opposite. We're going to turtle up completely in our base and go for the biggest boom possible. We do get attacked early on within the first few minutes, and luckily I'd got a couple of towers down kind of thinking this would happen, and they just about fend off the enemy. The one thing I'm not doing, you might note, is using Rex to kill these enemies. We could probably hold this really easily if I remembered from the last stage that Rex is actually a powerful combat unit. Well, we don't, so we're playing the no Rex challenge run for most of this campaign for some reason. We just about get away with it with a few half-dead towers and a couple of the ones. The reason I want to boom so much on this stage is I've now invented a tier 5 ranged unit, so the ultimate culmination of my plan, the most powerful possible thing I can attack move into the enemy base and then do something else unit should now be available. It's going to be pretty expensive, and it does mean we need a long boom to get to the final tech level, which is just something you buy through your lab, and then we can start making it. And we're going to go for that long boom instead of attacking early. Is that a good idea? Probably not. Well, I just wanted to try it out. It turns out, though, there's going to be a subtlety to this stage that screws us over with this plan to some extent. Well, we just sit here completely obliterating the enemy's attack waves. They're attacking our base quite a lot, but with enough defenses, we're taking them out for free, essentially, not spending resources to fight them, so that allows us to build this army, and we start moving out with a variety of things, including my new endgame, electric eel hippos, or maybe it was rhinos. Basically, something that has loads of size stat attached to a long-range electric ranged attack. So that we're going to have that attack move goodness with loads of extra damage attached, although no regenerating health this time, unfortunately, just really high base health. Meanwhile, in the story, it turns out our lab was actually so damaged that we weren't controlling the animals with science. We were controlling them with Rex's secret powers. I think what it's getting at here is that Rex is himself an impossible creature. By the looks of him, he's a combination of a human and another human. One could argue that all humans are that. Well, Rex is the impossible version because he can also talk to the animals and control them with his mind and such. I'm sure a big revelation is coming, so we better keep going. Now you can see what's happened is our base has moved to the other side of the island, and it proposes we go and attack the enemy's main base, but it also says their main base is going to be very heavily defended and they're going to have loads of good units. So we could go around to other places in the map and take out the enemy's power production to instead just hamper their ability to make good units and maybe out-resource the enemy. But to do all that, we would need units, and where are our units? Well, they're gone. It seems this story event that moves your base also deletes a lot of stuff. Maybe it only deletes what's outside of your base's range or something, because we have a few units back here still. For whatever reason, the army I made during my initial boom is gone, so that sucks. We end up essentially having to restart this stage from a new base, although already with the techs in place, so we just make use of the resources we now have access to build up once again. Looks like I was considering changing the 2 now that we also have essentially the 3 unit available. The reason being, I think, that I suspected maybe it wasn't going to be as cost effective to actually spam the tier 5 ranged units. Because they're expensive and because they don't have regenerating health, I was thinking, is it a good idea to send wave after wave of those against the enemy? I kind of preferred this idea of, well, the thing I was mentioning recently where you have a regenerating health unit that can just pick away at the enemy's defenses while constantly regenerating health, and when they send out small groups to attack you, when you're constantly aggroing them, you trade for free effectively because all the damage you take just gets reversed. But my mind on that was changed by me doing something like this. I tried to raid the enemy's exterior base locations to perhaps capture some more resources. And when I saw that they had an absolutely gigantic frog unit that was looking at me, I just thought that frog unit is probably a tier 5 endgame range unit that's going to kill me, and immediately started running away. But you can't really run away in this game because everything can just aggro onto you and follow you back. So we lose most of the army I made so far to this attack as we skirmish back to our base, and generally speaking things don't go very well. This is what it was getting at, saying the enemy's base is too strongly defended. They just have really good units and loads of them already sitting on the map ready to go. And we don't do very well. I try to make a forward base and it dies. We end up just fighting back to our own base again, losing everything. I'm trying to spam out those 2s, but we don't have the resources to do it. The reason I'm putting so much pressure on the enemy is I thought I needed to capture that junction down there to get any more resources. But after scouting around, it turns out there's a natural expansion point for free right above your own new base. So we can actually just expand there and boom up much more than I thought. Seeing that and realizing we could just make tons of henchmen and boom up to having tons of resources real fast, and the enemy might not attack us if we just sit back in the corner here, we can boom to Tech 5 army again, but this time we don't have to get the Tech 5 part of that, we're just making the units. So we're going to be defended as we boom this time by the fact I'm going to have the units during the boom, or during the build-up phase. So it's safe for us to sit here, we can afford to sit here, we don't have to play aggressive or do anything too special. Now you might note that the game actually did tell us to do something special. It told us to go and capture other places on the map to defeat the enemy's production capabilities. Well, we're not going to do that because I didn't want to. I don't mind if my people get killed, I just want to attack move into the enemy base. So I'm really determined to just make an attack force that is so powerful that I can overcome the challenge the map is trying to give us here. We can just still frontally attack and win anyway. That said, you might note I'm also doing an actual strategy, because we still have our old base and we weren't done taking the resources from it. I built the helicopter pad, which you can only have one of, but it can gradually take some of your henchmen across the map, and as long as there are no anti-air towers, we can take guys to our old base and start using it again. On the way, I not only discovered where some of the enemy's power is coming from in this undefended corner, but there's another tiny available base here on this little spit of land, so we'll start taking the resources here as well. So we're going to do some real boom strats. We are going to be raiding the map with flying units, which is probably what the game wants you to do, but instead of doing anything clever, we're just going around taking the resources, leaving the enemy alive, ready for my big rhino surprise later on. Here we are later, when it's go time. We've got Rex right on the front lines here. Rex actually now provides a buff to nearby animals as part of his awakening as an impossible creature himself. So because my melee attackers have the buff where they get extra defense if they're in packs of more than 4, I think it is, we can then stack that with the attack buff, which they normally couldn't do by having Rex nearby. Although in this case, we're using Rex to power up our ranged attacks instead, because that's what I'm hoping will do the damage. So basically, we've got a whole bunch of electric eel rhino things, and there's not much the enemy can do now. We are able to take out the base I was going for earlier much more successfully. And of course, like in most strategy games, it's going to be one of these positive feedback loop things, where as long as you have a small advantage, you can win absolutely, because that small advantage diminishes the enemy's advantage the longer you have it, and things spiral out of control until it's really easy. Versus what we saw earlier where, well, the opposite was happening. It was spiraling out of control until it was too hard and I just lost everything. So this time, it worked. We had enough number to overcome the number barrier. The activation energy has been achieved. Now, we're just going straight into the enemy base, finally achieving my dream of ignoring what the game was telling me to do. The only problem is that our ranged attacks take so long to kill enemy buildings that I switched to mostly using melee attackers instead as the ranged units died, to actually take out the enemy building that completes the level without having to clear out the whole map, so something was achieved there. we now move on to the next island where we're facing the evil guy Upton Julius's main production hub, and here you can see he has his own flying trains. This is where the flying trains are coming from. One of these things where old Upton Julius should probably just sell flying trains and ignore the whole mad science project. Maybe that's just his passion and the flying trains is just to fund it. Well, they're around here as well, and they act as enemy bases, so we want to take them down to prevent the enemy from harvesting the resources on the map as usual. That means we want to do it as fast as possible, and that means spamming lobsters at the enemy, which doesn't go very well. We lose all of them, but only after taking 2 more expansion points, so 2 more sets of coal basically. And that's fine, because in the time it took us to do that, we've got the tech to begin our general spammed rush of high tier units, and we now have enough resources under our general control to make a massive stockpile and keep this rush going, probably for the rest of the game from just here. But if we keep going, we'll also find more things to capture as well. Not quite sure what I was doing there, but it's time for us to advance. We've only got half of an army here, so I'm doing the cheeky advance, where you just see how far you can get without ever really stopping. Because of that rush advantage I keep mentioning, if we can get into an enemy base and take it out before they tech up, before they research better creatures, and before they take as many resources as they will do later, it will only compound our advantages later. But it's one of these strategy game things. You have to call it at some point. Looks like I called it here after taking some artillery attacks. Because if there's going to be any resistance, it would be better to keep the first half of your army so that you get the full army faster. So you're trading off that against the advantage from attacking the enemy as soon as possible, that sort of stuff. Strategy brain is happening in the background, and I found that happened quite a lot in this game, because basically every stage is a rush test where there's always an advantage to rushing. You're constantly faced with that decision of how much should I rush. And there are many subtleties to this, because you can't know the answer, you don't know the numbers behind it all, even though there are some numbers out there. You have to just guess, and I feel like even for relatively experienced strategy game players, it can be hard to work out when just rushing and taking losses to inflict a greater loss on the enemy is ultimately a good thing. You need tons of game knowledge to make this decision correctly, and it's not like I am making this decision correctly, but I'm enjoying having to make the decision. I think that's what I'm saying, and this feeds into me saying this game is a relatively intense strategy experience like I did earlier, because normally a game might be chill and not really require you to rush quite so much, or not give you such a disadvantage from not rushing as this game does. In this game, the stages get harder and harder the longer you're in there, so if you're playing poorly and not advancing quickly, it's going to get harder to advance. At least if you don't still have any room to tech up in, but because you can tech up to the max pretty fast, making rushes very viable, it's also the case that if your rush fails, you're probably screwed after that, because the enemy will keep getting more powerful, and generally they have more bases, more resources, things like that. We'll come back to that topic, I'm sure. You can see what's actually happening in the stage is we advanced up, took out some more enemy stuff, but Lucy died in the background because she was attacked by a bunch of flyers. Well, not so bad. I thought I'll just go back to an autosave, because on this stage it saves every time you take out one of the enemy's many bases. The problem is, that attack on Lucy happened about 2 seconds after the autosave from killing the last base. So going back to the last save takes me back to basically exactly the same time I noticed this problem existed in the first place, that being too late to solve it. So I ended up in a spiral of constantly trying to move Lucy in different directions, hoping I could escape. Eventually we get this setup where she just about comes out alive from the enemy's attack, and we can lead the attack over to this base I had started building, and because I was paranoid about air attacks, I'd mainly just built loads of anti-air towers here rather than anything else, which proves to be exactly what we needed right here. Some kind of instinct paid off. I think it's because the enemy have an air base somewhere up and left of where I was, so I was aware we were probably going to get raided. And we got away with it, so we somehow don't die and we don't have to start the stage again. And our main blob, well, it's just doing its thing. I'm just building upon the enemy bases, claiming tons of resources that we don't even need right now, because we're not really taking losses. We are slamming through the enemy's bases, well, slowly, I should say, again, because we're relying on those ranged attacks that don't do very well. I could, like, mix in some high-tier lobsters here, some anti-building style units that might make this a bit faster, but I can't be bothered, and there is some argument to be made for not diversifying your forces, because you're only allowed to design 9 units in total. So if you have more than 9 designs, you have to get rid of something to make a new creature. And you need to have enough designs that you have something to build at each tech level, although I have nothing for the first tech level because you can always rush the second level pretty fast. So in that regard, playing lazily like I am is sort of encouraged. That's my excuse. And it's working out because we're doing pretty well. The game is trying to get harder, but I'm just spamming the rhinos and it's doing the business, and it seems there's not much the enemy can do now. They're just too good, or I'm getting them too early in the stage for the enemy's advantage to accumulate over time, as I was saying, so we can get away with everything. I was again thinking while playing this stage about the whole positive feedback loop thing, where if you play well, the game gets easier. So, well, I've talked about this in a few videos recently. I don't know the solution to this problem, but I have, in my radical mind, some idea that some combination of positive and negative feedback loops might be better in some way, but whenever I encounter a negative feedback loop in a difficulty sense, it's always weird. So that is to say, like in this game, it's positive feedback loop because if you play well, the game gets easier. So the better you are, the less good you need to be, and that spirals up. So because we had a great first 5 minutes, the stage is easy. So the worst way, or the least enjoyable way to play the game is to play it badly, which means new players, well, you just suck, basically. You don't get to have fun. You have to work out how to do it. And the usual solution to a game that's really positive feedback loopy like that is get good, and myself would have used to be in that school of thought, because getting good can be part of the fun. The problem is, I feel more and more that it's better to sort of get outside of that mindset and think, you know what, getting good isn't necessarily fun. Your game needs to be tailored such that it's really fun to play while being bad at it, to make getting good a fun process that the player will do without having to be told. Like ideally, in a game which you can get good at and still have fun, nobody will ever say get good because you'll never be complaining that the game's too hard. You'll be relishing the challenge and enjoying the fact that you feel you're getting better at it, but you're also getting some actual gameplay content along the way. And I contrast that to something like this game, where I imagine if you struggled with this, if you struggled with the micro, it would just be impossible to overcome. You'd just be getting dumped on constantly by the AI. And there's nothing in the game that makes it easier for you or gives you some reward for trying, anything like that. So an example of that would be like, you can grind and just get more powerful in some way, such that losing a stage a bunch of times is still productive, and you might still have fun doing it. I don't know. And of course the negative feedback loop, the opposite thing, which we looked at in the Lord of the Rings game I played recently, is where if you're playing badly, something about the game automatically gets easier to counteract for it. The downside to that is that if you want to make the game easier as a good player, so you want to play good in that you want the enemy to be at a disadvantage, you then have to deliberately play bad to make the negative feedback loop trigger, and it's kind of weird, and the entire game ends up feeling like an exploit if you want to try and get as much advantage as you can, which is what a good player would probably try to do. Well, that's something I'm thinking about, so I decided to waste some of my and your time by saying that just now. Let's go back to the game we're playing right now. We took out the enemy's flying train production facilities. They're a bit miffed, but they've still got some more stuff, so we're going to have to kill them even more after this. Therefore, we proceed to the next stage, where Rex is saying we must destroy Sigma. What's Sigma? Well, we'll never find out. Essentially, we're deciding whether we should destroy the mad science entirely so that nobody can control impossible creatures. And also, I think Rex was talking about his dreams he's been having. He is a Sigma male, of course, meaning he is in some way part of the mad science. So he might even have to destroy himself if he truly wants a world free of people who can command elephant eels to shock people to death. I think in the actual plot here, they shouldn't have even bothered going down this plot route of being like, this technology is too dangerous, we have to destroy it, because it's really not that dangerous. It's 1937, there's way more dangerous stuff being invented everywhere. The whole elephant eels thing, or rhino eels, doesn't matter very much in the grand scheme of things. Why don't we just let a few people live? Like, is it worth committing a few murders to stop the elephant eels coming into existence? Maybe if we just alerted the authorities instead of trying to do this ourselves by also creating and getting killed a whole bunch of animals. Look, let's not look too far into the true war ethics of impossible creatures. I don't think that's intentional. But I think that this game does contain lots of cruelty to animals, and indeed to humans as well, for no good reason. And I think that everybody in the Impossible Creatures universe has not realized that things like the machine gun are far more important war tools than combining lions with ants, that sort of thing. Well, maybe I just don't know very much about these Impossible Creatures. Maybe they are bulletproof. For the next stage, Lucy disappears, and we have this stage where you're supposed to follow a set of footprints to see where she's gone. And story events will trigger as you reach certain points, but what you can also do is just not follow the footprints in order to do other things and probably do some kind of sequence breaking. We're going to do this sort of intentionally in this stage because, well, as you'll see, I didn't actually know how to follow the footprints at first. Is that because I'm an idiot? Or is that because the game was intending you to follow them in a certain way that's not necessarily immediately obvious, and the readability of the game is the issue? This is the game designer's eternal quandary, essentially. Is any problem a player has with any game the fault of the game or the fault of the player? Because it has to be some combination of those two. And, well, I suppose it's a style of game design to care about that. You can either say get good, or you can be like, I have to get good, or make it so that they will get good on their own, as I was saying earlier. You know what? I'm too tired to rant even more today. Cut to tomorrow me, when maybe I'll say something more coherent. Well, yesterday's me, I don't know about that. You have too much faith in me. Let's see what's happening today. Basically, we didn't follow the trail, but what we did do is go to where the trail was going to go anyway. It was going to take us on a tour around the map, where we'd have to fight a whole bunch of enemy bases to trigger the next stage in the trail. What we're doing instead is just taking out all the enemy bases early on, and I think this is actually a bit easier, because some enemies only spawn after triggering the story sequences, and of course just doing things as soon as possible is always easier, as I keep saying. So we blast through the enemies, and in this footage you can see me actually bothering to use Rex as a unit now. I've got him on his own control group, so amid the chaos I can get him to snipe away at individual enemies, and his attack does tons of damage. He also buffs our guys for being nearby them, and he has regenerating health, I believe, as well. So he's a really good unit to have in the main block, and we're finally taking advantage of that. I took a while to clear out the entire map because there were loads of odd production buildings hidden away in corners, allowing the enemy to do things like this, suddenly attack while I was really far away. Luckily, I'd also been really locking down my bases with defenses, just for something to do. We're so rich, we have so many henchmen, we might as well build up all of our bases, and it actually pays off because we do get attacked. Eventually, I'm doing the objective. All you had to do was get Rex to stand at the end of the footprints, and it would cause more footprints to spawn. And that was what you were supposed to be following, as it turns out, and I just didn't realize. I thought just seeing the footprints was enough, so I walked past the first set without standing on them, thus never triggering the thing, and I end up effectively doing the stage again, but in easy mode the second time, because now all the bases these footprints were trying to get us to destroy are gone already. The point of all this was that Lucy has decided that we are going to stop Sigma after all, because she notices that the mad scientists are killing all of the local people in their experiments, camera clipping through the ground there, outrageous, and, well, Rex is going to help as well, and she's like, you're going to help me stop it or get out of my way, but I thought the whole thing was that I wanted to make you help me stop it, or you get out of my way. I don't know, she's mad at me, but we actually agree entirely, so we go on to start defeating Sigma once and for all. And to do that, we're going to capture the island of this Dr. Ganglion that I think was mentioned somewhere. In this stage, we're doing another boom strat where I'm focusing on making defenses as early as possible rather than any units. Because I'm going to need the defenses anyway, that was my logic. I'm going to use them later, so I might as well just build them as early as possible. This is another map where there's a natural expansion point, essentially in my base. Doesn't really look like it, but that place I'm building up there is behind my choke point defenses. And it's also mentioning here that Rex does damage to enemies who attack him. He has this counter-attack ability where he's poisonous to them or something. Basically, Rex is getting more powers as the campaign goes on. Well, he's currently being put to use sort of aggroing the enemy. Using Rex as a tank, as an aggro beacon, is a decent idea because he needs to be near the fight anyway for his buffs, and because he regenerates health and is a powerful sniper unit. it's useful to have him on the front line, meaning that you can just take free damage and not have to worry about your other units. So I was doing something like that with him while I gradually built up. You might have noticed there, the enemy actually withdrew. Instead of pressing their attack and failing, they ran away after their attack started to fail, which I totally didn't expect. Most RTS games would never even have that ability programmed in. I don't think I saw much else of that in the campaign. Maybe it's just in this stage they can do it, who knows. But the fact that I saw it happen at all was impressive to me. Maybe it was a mistake. Another thing we've unlocked here is the ability for henchmen to heal our units. So now I've got henchmen running in the main battle group. It's not the easiest thing because I believe to get a henchman to heal your units, you have to order them to heal one of them, and once they're in healing mode, they'll go around and heal them all. What they don't do is just heal them when they're idle. That's what I'd like to see, so that you can just fire and forget that whole system. Instead, every time they stop healing, they will then stop healing forever, effectively, until you tell them to start again, even if they're just standing there next to something they could heal. So, it wasn't that effective to have henchmen in the main group, but I liked the idea. With some control groups and some bothering to click on things, we could be more powerful here, but we're just not doing that. And maybe we don't need to because we storm through the map, taking out the enemy bases as soon as possible as usual. However, things slow down once we get to the final enemy base. There's this big curly structure in the terrain where we have to walk around the enemy base with canyons on either side with stuff shooting down to get in. And the problem with this is the wrangling goes out of control once again because the melee units want to run all the way to the end of this track to attack the nearby towers, so my units will naturally run into the enemy base just getting killed, trying to get to something that's at the end of the enemy base. So that really sucks. We have to really keep control of those units, and I just failed to do so. So we kept losing these Sobex, my melee chargers, whereas the ranged units were advancing more slowly, mainly because I'm attack moving. They waste a lot of time gradually taking out anti-air towers nearby. The alternative is to not attack move, but even if you do that, they're going to aggro backwards and start going back to kill the anti-air towers if they're still in range or in vision. So I had a really difficult time getting from this part of the map we're looking at now to just over to the right. After completely obliterating the stage and being fine, we genuinely started taking losses and grinding our way up this final approach to the enemy base. And it's compounded by the fact the enemy have started producing a better unit. They've produced this hippo archerfish, I think it is, an artillery unit that's big, fat, has tons of health, and is big as well in that it has extra range in the way that size affects range. So this is a great counter to my blob here because they can just shoot at us from afar. My melee units will have to constantly run forward to try and get these things into melee to stop this attack. But there are just so many of them back here that it's not really working, although we are forcing the enemy to shoot at themselves a bit here as well. So we grind our way up, and I got stuck right here, right at the entrance to the enemy base, where I slapped down unit production and spammed out units to try and keep this fight going. You can see in the top left I ran out of resources and we're not pop-capped, so we're actually on the verge of seeing something like a defeat happen to us here. We can't fight much more than this. We really just threw everything into their base, and we won. Why? Because the enemy have the same problem. Because we were so aggressive, we've captured even the enemy's natural expansion point for resources. So even if we're trading really inefficiently, and I'm pretty sure I was there, it's really hard for them to keep getting resources. And we can tell they're out of resources in their main base because their henchmen are running out all over the map and trying to look for more. So with that, I was happy to go in with my smaller army and take out the enemy base with no resources left on our side. Pretty good. I could have moved some henchmen up to take the enemy's resources now, so we had a bit more leeway. But it ended up being really close after being really easy all the way up to that point. And it was just the wrangling there in the end. It was hard to tell because I was cutting the whole time, but essentially we lost our army several times over just off screen while I wasn't looking at it because it was doing its own thing and getting killed. Well, looks like Dr. Ganglion avoids getting killed here due to a Charlie Chaplin-esque comedy wall fall. We actually capture this guy and he joins our side. I can't really remember in the plot why he joins our side. I think it's because he likes Rex, because he's aware that Rex is the chosen one or something. So he's willing to betray the evil guy Upton Julius for now and help us actually go and kill Julius. But there's now an obstacle, it seems. To go to Julius's base, you have to go through this big door. Why? I don't know. For some reason, the only way to fly there in our flying train is to fly specifically through this door. I don't know. Look, don't worry about it. For some reason, there's now another stage. The goal of the stage is to open the door so that you can go through it with your flying train and then go to the next stage. In this stage, one of the enemy bases is right next to yours where you start. You can pretty much see it from your start point. So we're immediately fighting with the enemy, and this is going to be to our advantage because now the advantage of rushing is really going to be here. And they've probably set it up for rush purposes because this base isn't very heavily defended, and it has 2 expansion points worth of resources in it, so easily enough to do all of the booming I could ever want and get to the max tech tier and get a max army size. All I have to do is take the base right outside my own base. So we're going to set up in the corner of the map here and just do our thing. Again, you can see me using their Rex as a tank. By putting Rex in front of the enemy's tower, he can just take the damage. His regenerating health almost completely negates the damage. It's almost regenerating faster than he's taking damage. So we save our units from being killed, take out the towers. Now we're fine to clear this base and we'll just take all the resources. Although clearing the base is optional as well. Simply putting our own base next to this enemy stuff is fine. We could leave a couple of guys to eventually take out the enemy. Although that air factory is a problem. We want to take that out as soon as possible since they could produce units in our back lines if I don't actually do something about it. But the AI probably hasn't researched any air units yet or something, so we've got some time. What we do end up really facing is artillery units, another group of artilleries coming up this choke point into our base. And this is a pretty decent counter to what I'm spamming here, which appears to be the porcupines again from earlier. I think I might have modified them to be better or something, trying to find a replacement to the 2. A failed replacement, most likely. And yes, we're taking real damage from the fact that we don't have something that can run forwards and put the artillery into melee, so we take serious splash damage since we're just sitting in a block after all. Because of that, I switched my army composition up a bit, and we see me here using this new Hippo unit. It's a Hippo Scorpion. The idea is that it's a melee unit that's going to have that herding bonus, meaning it gets extra defensive bonuses from being together. And I think the claws will give it the anti-building bonus, so we're moving away from the Sobek crocodile gorilla things I had before, and we'll have something that's actually going to really quickly eat through enemy bases as we find them, while also acting as an effective tank. Although, again, we still have to wrangle them, as we can see here. These guys just run straight into the enemy base and aggro all sorts of nonsense over here. On this stage, the enemy have special gigantic units that I think you can take control of yourself, although I don't remember using them. So they have loads of really powerful one-off units standing around the map, and most of them, they're right here, and we managed to aggro them all into a fight simultaneously because I don't have proper control over my things. I feel like that's maybe why I wanted to go for an only ranged unit build, because I feel like you have more control over ranged units. It's easier to change their mode so that they won't attack things aggressively and will just shoot things in their range. And because they tend to move forward less on their own when they're in combat, they tend to stay together. They stay literally on the screen so that you can see them all the time. And somehow I haven't mentioned this so far, but it's worth mentioning. You can't zoom the camera out more than this. One of those old games, in essentially all old-fashioned strategy games, it would always be to your gigantic advantage to be able to zoom out the camera more, but it's always artificially limited, probably due to performance things that only would have applied in the past. So if you could get some kind of mod that let you zoom out to select your whole army when it was more spread out, it would be much easier to control. But instead, my stuff just walks off the screen whenever it feels like it and then dies while I'm not looking, as I said. And this was a constant source of frustration, but the game is presumably designed with that in mind, so it's easy enough that it doesn't really matter that you can't control your army too much. Well, looks like we did the business here. We did take out a big army of enemy stuff. I've got my frontline production just restoring my stuff back up to full strength. And despite my lack of micro / the insanity of our units causing higher casualties than needs be, we're going to be able to take out that enemy base and our own bases under attack at the same time by the looks of things. But you can also see I've got towers all over the place. I'm being very paranoid about being attacked, and it's still paying off. And you might as well, since it doesn't count towards the pop cap. Spamming towers is quite a nice way to waste some resources. After taking this enemy base, there was a fairly substantial counterattack coming through a choke point to the east, and I fought there for a while. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm pop-capped, even with barely anything at the front line. Maybe I've just gone too crazy building henchmen all over the place, and we're just going too hard on the economy. Well, clearly we are, because we have tons of resources and not enough units. I also didn't have Rex at the front line. I think I ran him off to go capture a killer whale out in the sea or something like that. Eventually, though, I sort things out, we rebalance, we secure this area, we get unit production at the front line, and now we have this big blob of grey things that are glowing blue and orange, doubly buffed, and they're ready to go. We can attack move those things towards the enemy base, and we are in business. And these hippos are proving really useful, because they're surprisingly fast for some reason. I think they might have a charge attack or something. So when the enemy have things like these gigantic gorillas that are throwing things at us, we can really fast charge into melee range and stop the long-range bombardments. That's precisely what I needed from these units, so it's doing the business. And the enemy base is going to go all the way down. This was a frustrating map, I suppose, because you had to destroy every single building on the map to win, including like random towers that I'd accidentally walked past on the way in, so I had to go around finding them all. But eventually, it opens the door, and we can fly our flying train through the door. What was the point of that? I don't know. They decided the game needs another stage, and they put that one in there. Now, moving on, I actually missed the cutscene because I accidentally hit escape or something and skipped it. But for some reason, we're now on another island that's poisoned. And the gimmick is that you only have 15 minutes to get to the antidote. Otherwise, you just get game overed, I suppose. And what the poison does is it sometimes causes your animals to switch over to the enemy's control. Or actually, as he's saying right now, they will first become neutral animals, so they'll go back into the world, I suppose, and other times they will go over to the enemy's control. Essentially, you just lose units randomly, so that's the effect of the poison. And if you don't solve it within 15 minutes, something bad will happen. So because we've got that time limit, we really need to rush this time. So I'm attacking with only a couple of guys, using Rex as a tank once again. Here we are, about halfway to the place we need to get to, with about half the time limit done. I'm still trying to do the standard build and rush back in the base at the same time, especially to upgrade the units I'm using to make this push. I make a unit production building outside the enemy base we need to attack as usual, and then spam in with some the twos added to the army. And that's enough. There aren't really many units defending this area, just tons of towers, and you can see that just walking past the towers is a pretty valid strategy. Towers aren't especially powerful, especially these level 1 towers the enemy has. They only become more powerful later on after a certain tech has been researched, so early in the match just rushing is more effective, and boom, we do take out the thing before the time limit runs out, and the game appears to almost crash as well. What I think they're doing with this is the antidote has spread onto the floor, and all units that you produce from now on need to be either produced in this puddle or have to walk to the puddle at some point to be immune to going back to the wild / to the enemy side. Now I sort of cottoned onto this and put my unit production in the puddle to try and make use of this. I'm not actually sure if that's what's happening, but it seems to be the case, because we'll see that units I made later will still betray me, so the puddle's something to do with it. It probably would have been nicer if the effect on the map just went away when you did something. Still having to worry about it was annoying. We're also under heavy artillery bombardment here at the base because I didn't have any melee units in my initial attacking army, so we were quite vulnerable to this kind of counterattack. Luckily, I had just about got a couple of hippos out in time to deal with this, and then we attack move on towards victory, of course. But now we're going to have the issue that my usual plan of setting up a frontline base right in front of the enemy's base isn't going to work so well, because units I make in the enemy base area will be susceptible to just disappearing out of my control or betraying me. Luckily, it doesn't happen that much that it's a huge problem. I think just attacking anyway from here is fine. We're still having much more problems with the usual thing, where the hippos just walk off out of my line of sight and get themselves killed. We're having to just constantly rebuild those things to deal with this attack. We are being attacked back at one of my forward bases, so stuff is still betraying us on the way out of its production centers, but whatever. Enough stuff was on our side that we rushed the enemy base and took them out without having to face any of the high-tier units. I think if you complete a stage in roughly less than half an hour, the AI is very unlikely to have reached the final tech level, and you can get there in like 10 minutes if you really rush it, so you can get a decent period of time where you can advance very quickly for that 20 minutes in between, and that might just be enough to advance across the entire map. Now, for reasons I forget, we don't have Lucy at the moment, and Rex says there we're going to go and rescue Lucy from the main villain. If you ask me to try and remember why we don't have Lucy, I would say that she was abducted by a giant gorilla. I had a brief look through the footage and I couldn't see that happening. I don't know if I imagined that. I have this idea that a sort of King Kong moment happened at some point in the plot. I guess I skipped over it in this video. I don't know when that happened. At some point, Lucy was abducted by a giant gorilla, I assure you. Well, for one reason or another, she is currently residing in the main base of the mad scientist, for whom she technically works for. I'm not quite sure what her backstory is, but she's actually part of this project as well, but she just wants to destroy it now that she's seen that people were dying or something. She didn't actually mind the original animal experiments. She's in a moral grey zone, but we're going to rescue her anyway. However, upon going to the big bad guy's base, he immediately takes us down with this button he has. Because we are a Sigma male, we can be controlled in the same way that the animals can be controlled with whatever it is they've invented to do this. So, that's going to be a problem. However, we're too powerful, it seems. We can actually overcome the programming because we also control the animals. It turns out we control them a bit more than the machine does. So with this explosion of violet light, we take control of the nearby animals, and the mad science is overwritten. So the big bad guy runs away to a helicopter that happens to be nearby, that's pretty useful, and flies away. That means we're going to have a final showdown with this guy. He can't stop us, but maybe we can stop him. And the thing we're trying to stop him from doing specifically, by the way, is creating more Rexes. The guy's actual plan wasn't just the animals thing. He wanted to create people who could control animals, like Rex, so Rex is the prototype of that. And that's why he was trying to take us alive for the whole story or something. But, well, not that that mattered, and he does actually try to kill you, so that's a plot hole, but whatever. He was going to take over the world by creating loads of people who can do what we're doing here, go to random places in the world, take control of all the animals, and overthrow the government. And he was going to control that army of people to rule the world himself. Again, I think it's forgetting that there are various things that animals can't overcome. What if they come at you with a Stuka? What if they come at you with 200 Siberian mountain men armed with Mosin Nagants? That's going to be a very real risk as you try to take over the world of 1937. Well, maybe if you have enough killer whales with ant legs, you can deal with that. I'm not quite so sure. Well, whatever. His plan is doomed to failure because I'm here now. It's time for the final stage, and this is another one where you have loads of resources in your base, so it's quite easy to just turtle up and then go for the final tech level before you do anything too significant. For this final showdown, I decided to whip out a couple more units, because we now have access to sperm whales and elephants. Two animals that are big, and if you were listening earlier, making an animal combination with something big in it makes all of the numbers go up. So we've now got a much better version of our melee scorpion with an elephant involved, ridiculous health and damage, and an upgrade to the 2, effectively, a spiritual successor that I still haven't called the 3, a gigantic sperm whale chameleon crossover, where that secret really high size stat will not only not really make it that big so we can still mass them, but it gives them ridiculous range and power on their tongues. So we now have the ultimate fire and forget ranged unit. The only downside to these things is they're really slow, but another upside is that they also have regenerating health and loads of health, so it really is a complete upgrade on our classic unit, the 1, and we have the added advantage that ranged attacks sort of go through terrain, so even in cases like this, where there are cliffs and stuff, you can just shoot at enemy bases as long as they're somewhat in your range. You don't have to use artillery to shoot up and over things, which is what's happening to us right there. The enemy came at us with some naval artillery units, and they're taking out one of the expansion points. I just abandoned it instantly because we've already captured enough ground to make expansion points elsewhere, so we'll make other bases away from the naval attack and just ignore said attack, while very, very slowly our whale chameleons creep forward, just licking everything into oblivion. This is another section of a map where the enemy are close to you, but the path to them is quite long, so it's hard to keep control of your melee units, and your ranged units spend ages attacking things they don't really need to. But eventually, it does the business. We start capturing that enemy base over there. However, my base is in trouble because that naval attack I was ignoring has just been getting bigger and bigger, and my main base is completely exposed to attacks from the sea. We're lucky in that these units don't appear to be amphibious, so they can't actually come into our base, but they've got enough range to take out most of it from the sea. And, well, we should probably do something about that, because you do lose the stage if you lose your main lab building. Only just in time do I build some of my long tongs to go and take out these things. The reason I couldn't just build them immediately to deal with this was I was pop-capped, so I had to lose some units on the front line to build here, although I believe you can delete your own units, so I could have done this earlier. Well, it doesn't matter too much. We lose our entire base, but I suppose we'll put it back. And the better news is that the enemy also lose one of their bases. This is the Ganglion base, so Ganglion, the guy, is now dead, I suppose. Here's how he died. I thought he was going to fall into this giant fan, but this is a game for kids or something, supposedly. I still think it's too hard for a game for kids. Well, it's being jovial, as I keep saying, so instead, it throws him off the fan, through the air into this gigantic wall, and he dies from blunt force trauma and probably drowning as well, which is more family friendly as a way to die, I believe. And that's that. We also captured his base fast enough that most of his resources are still here, so we'll be grabbing those, ready to fund our attack into the big one. The big villain, Upton Julius, has this huge base covering most of the map. It's time to get into this. The problem is, by the time we're attacking, he is producing these artillery units, the archerfish, hippos or bears or something, the same problematic unit that I had trouble with before. And we're going to have trouble again here because I don't have my melee units in position to do anything, and our big, really slow-moving blob of ranged units is still going to be extra vulnerable to just being completely bombarded by ranged attacks, or artillery attacks specifically, I should say, with their splash damage. So, we're in trouble here, and it's made worse by the fact that as you go on to this final section of the map, the enemy's bases are just in every direction, so you can't push in one direction and still be countering the enemy's counterattacks as you advance. So here I've gone to the left and we take out a small bit of the enemy base, but by leaving the route out of the enemy's base open, they go out and attack my base with this artillery block, and we're getting killed. And it's really hard to deal with artillery with our new long tongs because they're so slow. Closing to melee range is a difficult thing to do. I need to have some of the scorpions down there, ideally. What I actually did here was quickly pump out a The One, so making a celebrity appearance once again. It's The One, because it is the one for this job. I can quickly make them and have them just crawl in and be amongst the artillery. That's entirely with the goal of making the artillery shoot itself, so The One is just a sacrifice here, while my main blob of scorpions is making its way back, but the causeway between our bases is covered in enemy units. This map is quickly spiraling out of control. It turns into a real test of micro, primarily because of the camera being zoomed in. I can't look at these various fights happening at the same time, even though they're sort of close to each other, because they're going to be on different screens. And there's lots of clicking to be done. What I really need to do here is lock our bases down with tons of defenses, but even then, against artillery attacks, that might not be the best idea. So basically I was walking around trying to swarm to each new crisis point, just doing firefighting style strategy where everything's going wrong, and I'm constantly trying to cheekily advance, but every time I do something I get attacked from another direction. And we can see here the difficulty of advancing when there's always another line of artillery behind the one you get up to. So your melee units charge forwards and get the enemy into melee, but then they're also being bombarded by artillery from further back. So we keep having to micro this, make sure our units aren't attacking the nearby buildings that aren't so important, and try to just constantly kill the enemies with the goal of taking out their unit production. We need to get far enough forwards that this will stop. So we have to just keep committing to these fights. But well, you can see on the minimap we're being attacked further back as I advanced towards the back of the enemy base, and I wasn't finding much unit production. Just taking out unit production buildings isn't all that important either, because the enemy will rebuild them. I spent a lot of the campaign feeling like the enemy never bothered to rebuild their unit production, but if you're looking closely, just there actually in that shot, they were expanding the back of their base after I took out the front. So the AI is trying not to lose its production capabilities. So it would be more effective to send out some sacrificial scouts or something and find where the enemy are getting their resources and just focus on attacking there. Well, we do nothing like that. In fact, I get pushed back. We're now somewhat further back in our advance. I had to keep going back to deal with constant attacks coming from the east as I was trying to advance north, and if I advance too far north, we also get attacked from the west up there because there's another fork where the enemy can come at you from multiple directions. And we're just getting hammered, and I get hammered all the way back to the start of the enemy's base, effectively, and have to start thinking again about how we're going to do this. The only advantage we're gleaning from all this being that because our units do have that regenerating health and a huge health pool, that exchanging blows in unfavourable battles isn't so bad for us because we are draining the enemy's resources, whereas the damage we take is being repaired for free, so it doesn't cost us that much in terms of resources to just keep an eternal grind on the front lines going. I end up switching to an actual strategy. I have only a few melee units trying to hold back the massive waves of artillery coming down on our main base, and focus most of my attack group on going to the east. We take out an enemy resource base and advance up towards a unit production area as well. That goes pretty good, and I'm then able to fold back and focus again on trying to attack from the north, but this time there's less stuff happening behind our lines, and we do reach another unit production area and take it out. But we've actually already won by this stage, and you can sort of tell why if you're looking really closely. Their unit production building isn't making anything, and you might have spotted enemy henchmen are running out of their base and wandering around on my side of the map. That means the enemy base doesn't have any resources in it. We successfully outgrinded the enemy. We've actually already won the slow way because we control most of the resources on the map now, so the continuing grind will suddenly jump in our favour. I also made this sneak attack at the back of the enemy's base, taking out another of their resource collection points. And that just completely impoverished them. So we cut to here, I'm just in the middle of their base, they straight up stopped making units and we just pushed in with no trouble whatsoever. So that long grind to advance and even being pushed back eventually paid off because we had enough aggression, enough map control to just have more resources than the AI, and we get away with it. However, in the cutscene at the end, oh dear, it looks like Upton Julius remembers about guns. How are we going to get away with this? Well, Rex has a plan. The plan is, don't even look at him, maybe he won't shoot you. And he doesn't. A successful plan. You could say Upton Julius shot himself in the foot there, but well, the problem is he's not shooting anything, and in the process, he gets attacked by this giant bird, and I suppose that's the end of him. Another family-friendly death where you don't see him being torn apart by vultures. We can just imply that it happened. A happy ending. The mad science is finally over, ignoring the fact that we solved the mad science problem using even more mad science. We defeated him in a mad science battle of sorts. So you could say the situation has actually got a bit worse. I suppose we're going to use it responsibly, or something. Looks like Lucy was still alive in that building we were burning down. Should have checked first, I guess, but she's not mad about it. She comes out and she's like, oh, is it over, Rex? And Rex is like, yes, it's over. It seems they've both forgotten that we have to kill Rex to actually solve this problem. Rex loses his pupils, sort of implying that perhaps things aren't such a happy ending. Maybe the fact that Rex is now the only man left alive who could control evil animals and combine them together to make battle units will cause a disaster. We'll have to wait for Impossible Creatures 2, the alternate World War II scenario where it's the world versus Rex having taken over the Mad Science Project. Well, I don't know how long we're going to have to wait for that, because Relic Entertainment, as seen here, got distracted making more successful franchises, I suppose. They made Dawn of War and Company of Heroes, those sorts of things. Barely any creatures, although I suppose Dawn of War has a few. Well, you know, they've set themselves up for the sequel. We're all waiting for it to happen. And as you might be able to tell, that is the end of this Impossible Creatures commentary. Overall, I found it to be a somewhat enjoyable game, but probably I thought it was too hard. I feel like it was trying to market itself as a kid's strategy game, I suppose. Anyway, I don't really know, but it comes across to me as being the sort of game where back in whenever this came out, like 2008 or something, if you were trying to play this as a kid, you'd get like a really small distance into the game and just be unable to comprehend how to go further, because the game doesn't teach you any meta about like rushing or what is a good way to micro, things like that. RTS techniques that you learn through playing all of the RTSs through all of time in my case, but I feel like if you gave this to a generic person who might find it interesting, they probably wouldn't like it. So my official game design critique of this game is it needs to be a bit easier, and of course the usual things like being able to zoom the camera out and just have more maps, more variety. You might have noticed all the maps are basically the same. most of the time you're just fighting down a linear path, so it's very choke pointy and easy strategically like that. It's more about just having a good unit, and once you have a good unit, you can win, which was the case once we got a good unit in this campaign. Well, I'm a little bit mixed on my feelings, I suppose, on Impossible Creatures. I can kind of see why people wouldn't like it. Oh, it was 2003. Jesus, this is older than I thought. Well, so am I. Anyway, I can see why people wouldn't like it, but I enjoyed playing it, but I felt like the only reason I enjoyed playing it was because I was good enough. Like I had enough instinct for how to play it, that it went okay. And once I found out about that size thing, that was like the one piece of the puzzle that wasn't there for me, and it was easy after that. The one thing I like the most is the central concept, I suppose, of making your own units in a strategy game, where you don't have a set roster, and the number of combinations you can make in that roster is very large. It's a case where that situation is going to be impossible to balance, so there'll ultimately just be a couple of units that are just better than everything else for each particular use case. And once you know about them, the game loses all replayability that would come from that unit building thing. But at least for the first playthrough, that was very interesting. It was more interesting than playing this as an RTS if you just had normal units. If it was just normal units, this would just be the most generic and boring RTS. Probably good enough because the core RTS gameplay is there, it works, it was unbuggy, it all seemed to be very functional, the AI seemed to be half decent as well. But this animal thing on top, I found that quite interesting, and it makes me think of something like the ship designer in Galactic Civilization 2 that I talked about recently, which is a case where I didn't want to be making my own units. And I wonder what it was about this sort of game that makes me much more interested in making my own units. I'm starting to think, could we have a Dawn of War or Company of Heroes style sci-fi fantasy RTS where you actually design the units yourself? Usually I would say, no, don't do that, I don't want to design, I want to strategize with them. But some case where the impact of designing your units is really big. The difference you can make in designing your own units is huge. You're designing their sheer functionality, not just changing their stats or something like in Stellaris. If you want to make a unit that has really long legs or something like an AT-AT that can step up over cliffs, that's an actual strategy you can pull off. You can see a situation, think, if only I had a unit that could remain undetected underwater and could pop up at this point in the map and then use it to build something there. Like, you'd start thinking, I need a mechanical setup that does this exact strategy for me. Go into a menu and make something that does it, and it would feel very satisfying to overcome the situation by detecting some weird situation the enemy would be weak against and then making a unit that does specifically that. Would it be too annoying? That would be my worry. Like, I always get annoyed having to design units. I just don't want to. I just want to, like, throw numbers at things. So it needs to be the case where the unit designing isn't about just making the number bigger, it's about functionality. Impossible Creatures is a bit of both, because you're doing things like increasing the range or adding regenerating health, which is a mechanical thing that actually matters in strategy terms, but you're also redesigning units mostly just to get a higher number. I suppose you don't have to do it very much, and it's sort of interesting to do because you don't know what's going to happen. Like, you don't really know what stats combining a whale and a scorpion will give you. So it's a bit more curious to look at. Then something like Stellaris, where you think, well, I could change my lasers to torpedo tubes on my ship to change their numbers a bit, but wouldn't it just kind of be the same? Well, that's my vague feeling anyway. This game's best mechanic is a mechanic that I normally don't like. I suppose that's the takeaway, and I'm not entirely sure why. I see I've now failed my plan to make this video less than 2 hours, so let's just get out of here. We've all seen all of Impossible Creatures. I thought it was okay at the very least. I enjoyed playing it, but I would not want to play it again. It's that sort of setup. It's probably only fun the first time, surprisingly difficult, surprisingly intense at times as well, and just a surprise, a relatively pleasant surprise, but not that pleasant. I suppose that's my review, I don't know. Maybe I'll write something down and come up with a better way to describe all of this for another actual review video of this curious title, which perhaps Relic, if they still own the intellectual property to it or something, might one day want to come back to and make another game, perhaps just a spiritual successor that's more about mechanical things than animals or something like that. Some kind of build your own strategy game, not just designing units to tweak them a little bit. A real, powerful, do-it-yourself setup. Will someone take care of that? I'm out of here.